She went on national television begging people to help find her children, crying, shaking, looking directly into cameras, asking strangers to pray for their safe return. People across America genuinely felt bad for her. Parents hugged their kids tighter watching those interviews. Search teams mobilized. News stations interrupted programming. For over a week, this woman became the face of every parent's worst nightmare. There was just one problem. Susan Smith already knew exactly where her children were. And once you learn what actually happened in this case, those interviews become almost impossible to watch. Back in 1994, Susan Smith was a 23-year-old mother living in South Carolina with her 2 sons. Michael was 3 years old. Alex was just 14 months old. From the outside, her life looked fairly normal. Young mother, small town, 2 kids, relationship drama, financial stress. Nothing that immediately stood out as terrifying, but people close to Susan later described someone who was deeply unhappy. Her marriage had fallen apart. She was struggling emotionally, and she seemed obsessed with the idea of escaping her current life and starting over. One relationship in particular became extremely important to her. A wealthy local man named Tom Findlay, and according to reports, there was something Susan understood very clearly about him. He did not want children. That detail becomes very important later. Now here's where the story really begins. Late at night on October 25th, Susan contacted police in complete panic, claiming she had just been carjacked. She told investigators she was stopped at a red light when a black man approached the vehicle, forced his way inside, and drove off with her children still strapped into the back seat. Immediately, people were horrified. 2 little boys had supposedly just been abducted by an armed stranger. The story spread unbelievably fast. Within hours, it was national news. And Susan? She suddenly became the grieving mother the entire country was watching. If you go back and watch the footage now, it's honestly chilling. She's crying during interviews. Her voice shakes. She talks about how badly she wants Michael and Alex home safely. At one point, she directly pleads into the camera, asking the alleged kidnapper to please bring her children back. And people believed her. That's the part that still messes with people. Nothing about her public image immediately screamed killer. She looked devastated, exhausted, broken. Church groups organised prayer circles for her family. Volunteers searched nearby areas. People mailed support letters from across the country. The case became massive very quickly. But while the media focused heavily on the emotional kidnapping story, investigators were quietly noticing things that didn't add up. One of the first major red flags involved the intersection where Susan claimed the carjacking happened. She told police she had been stopped at a red light late at night. Simple enough. Except detectives checked the traffic system and realised something strange. That specific light would not turn red unless another vehicle was sitting at the intersection. According to Susan's version of events, the roads were empty, no other cars nearby, which meant the light should never have stopped her at all. That detail alone immediately caused problems for investigators. And once they started looking closer, more inconsistencies started appearing. Small changes in her timeline, details shifting slightly between interviews, emotional reactions that some detectives later described as unusual. Now, obviously, people react differently to trauma, so investigators couldn't just accuse a grieving mother because she seemed off. But suspicion was growing fast behind the scenes. Some detectives later admitted they believed very early on that Susan knew more than she was saying. Still, there was hesitation. Nobody wanted to jump to the conclusion that a mother had done something terrible to her own children. So police continued searching everywhere. Roads, wooded areas, lakes and ponds around the county. One location they searched was John D. Long Lake. At the time, it was just one search area among many. Nobody realised yet how important that lake actually was. While all of this was happening, Susan continued speaking publicly almost every day. And this is where the case becomes deeply disturbing psychologically. She didn't disappear from the spotlight. She leaned into it. More interviews, more pleas for help, more tears on camera. You'd see her holding stuffed animals belonging to the boys while talking about how badly she missed them. And when people watched those interviews in real time, most saw a terrified mother trying desperately to get her children back. But investigators watching closely Some of them were becoming increasingly convinced they were watching a performance. Then another major development happened. Susan agreed to take a polygraph test. Afterward, investigators reportedly became even more suspicious. At this point, the focus quietly started shifting away from the carjacking story itself and towards Susan. But there was still hope that Michael and Alex might somehow be alive. So the searches intensified. Divers checked nearby bodies of water. Police expanded search zones. Media coverage grew even larger. America became emotionally invested in these two missing boys. And through all of it, Susan stayed at the center of the story. For 9 days. 9 straight days. Then everything collapsed. On November 3rd, Susan finally confessed. There had never been a carjacker. No armed stranger, no kidnapping. The entire story had been fabricated from the beginning. Instead, Susan admitted she drove to John D. Long Lake with both boys still inside the car, Michael in his seat, little Alex beside him. Then she let the vehicle roll directly into the water. That revelation completely shocked the country. People had spent over a week emotionally invested in finding these children alive. Meanwhile, they had already been dead underwater the entire time. And what investigators found afterward made the case even more heartbreaking. When divers finally recovered the vehicle, it was much farther from shore than expected. Early searches had missed it because authorities assumed the car would be relatively close to the edge of the lake. It wasn't. When the car was brought back up, both boys were still inside, still strapped into their car seats. That detail alone permanently burned itself into the public's memory. Because suddenly, every television interview Susan had given felt horrifying in hindsight. Every tear looked different. Every emotional plea sounded different. People realized they had been watching somebody perform grief while already knowing the outcome. The deception wasn't just directed at police, it was directed at the entire country. Then investigators started digging deeper into Susan's personal life and relationships. And eventually prosecutors introduced what they believed was the motive. According to the prosecution, Susan wanted a future with Tom Findlay. But she also understood something painful. He didn't want a relationship involving children. Prosecutors argued that Susan began seeing her sons as obstacles standing between her and the life she wanted. Even saying that out loud feels horrible. And to this day, people still debate whether that was truly the full motive or whether severe mental illness played a larger role than the public initially understood. Because Susan's mental state became a huge focus during the trial. Her defense attorneys argued she was deeply depressed and emotionally unstable when the murders happened. Psychiatrists testified about her history of mental health struggles. The defense painted a picture of someone psychologically broken rather than purely evil. According to their version of events, Susan originally intended to die alongside her children in the lake, but changed her mind at the last moment and escaped the vehicle. The prosecution completely rejected that explanation. They argued her actions afterward told a very different story. This wasn't someone who immediately confessed in panic. She maintained the fake carjacking story for over a week while innocent people searched desperately for those children. That mattered a lot during trial, because jurors weren't just evaluating the murders themselves. They were evaluating the manipulation afterward, the interviews, the press conferences, the crying, the public pleas, the fake suspect description. And honestly, one of the darkest parts of this case is how her false accusation impacted people outside the investigation. Because Susan specifically blamed a black man who did not exist. For days, that false description spread across national media. It fueled fear, suspicion, and racial profiling against innocent people, all while the real truth was sitting underwater at the bottom of that lake. The trial became one of the biggest courtroom stories in America at the time. People were divided over whether Susan was a cold manipulator or a severely mentally ill woman who snapped psychologically. But despite all the debates surrounding motive and mental health, the jury still convicted her very quickly. Deliberations lasted only a couple of hours. Susan Smith was found guilty of murdering both of her sons. Some people expected the death penalty. Instead, she received life in prison.